We might not feel like being alone could be conducive to healing. And sometimes some of us don't want to be alone. We feel that is, it kind of makes it worse, or it makes us more sad. Hear me out on this topic, because I think there is so much peace to be found when we have that time alone. Whether we find ourselves alone because we want to, or if that is in control, or if it's kind of out of our control, which for me, it was a little of both, honestly. Not always by my choice at first, but I really came to embrace it.
This is the Life with Grief podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails, and so much more. I want you to think of this podcast as a safe space where I'm a friendly face and we're just journeying through this together to figure out how to live life with our grief in tow. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, support, tangible coping tools, inspiration, and some laughs along the way to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. But grieving or not, we're getting into countless topics here on the podcast, from coping with loss to self-development and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. And today's topic, I am so excited to dive into this because I think there's sometimes some misconceptions around what we're going to be talking about today. But it's something I'm truly so passionate about in terms of it being a part of our healing journey and navigating a potentially very devastating loss. So today I just wanted to have a quick conversation about reasons why alone time is important in our grieving journey and in our healing journey. And today we're going to talk about 7 specific reasons that I feel this way, but just for a little bit of context and where this came from, just as far as my own grief journey briefly, honestly, my relationship with embracing alone time came sort of by accident, to be honest. It's not that I necessarily wanted to spend a lot of time alone after my parents died. And again, just high level for anyone who doesn't quite know my story yet or is newer here. My mom died in December of 2019. My dad died in July of 2020. And so really this alone time that I'm speaking of came more so after my dad died. And for some additional context, my now husband, but then boyfriend, and I had broken up just maybe a couple months, I don't even think it was 3 months, before my dad died. And so I was really navigating this specific time in my life very much alone. I had family, I had friends, I had people checking on me. I felt supported, but at the end of the day, I did not have anyone there readily available with me like we might with a partner or, people just consistently physically in our life on a day-to-day basis checking on us and making sure we're okay and all of that. So I just remember thinking, especially the morning that my dad died, and I'm like looking out the window trying to make sense of what the hell has happened in my life to get me to this point. And it was the most alone I have ever felt. And at that time, it was definitely loneliness. There was a loneliness kicking in there for sure. But this journey of loss that I was then embarking on, that I had already started embarking on when my mom died, but really now as the only child of Greg and Lori Jordan and with no siblings and limited people around me just geographically, there was a lot I was trying to process and deal with. And I happened to do that by myself for quite a lot of it. And like I said, it wasn't like I didn't have people that I could call or text or whatever. I'm very grateful that I did, but they can only be there so often. Everyone has their own lives. Life goes on. You know how it goes with loss, right? So I found that in this time, I was really starting to self-reflect a lot. I was getting more introspective about just where my life was and where it had been and where I saw it going now, really without my parents. And this unlocked a lot of things for me. It unlocked, who I wanted in my life and who I didn't, and what I wanted to do for work and what no longer sparked joy for me. There was so many little nuances that started to come to mind as I was doing this. But the reason I feel so passionately about having that alone time and allowing that in is that I don't think I would be in the place I am in my grief now. I don't know that I would have even come to found Losses Become Gains or this podcast had I not given myself that opportunity. So enough about my story for a moment. I just want to validate a couple things here before we really dive in. We might not feel like being alone could be conducive to healing. And sometimes some of us don't want to be alone. We feel that is, it kind of makes it worse, or it makes us more sad. Sometimes there are just some of us where we really need, the family and the friends around us. We crave people around us, and that's okay. And that's beautiful. And so if that is you, if you feel like that is more you, I encourage you, find your people, right? By way of friends, family, a support group, what have you. All I want you to do today, no matter where you sort of fall on this spectrum of wanting people around you or not, is to just hear me out on this topic, because I think there is so much peace to be found when we have that time alone, whether we find ourselves alone because we want to, or if that is in control, or if it's kind of out of our control, which for me, it was a little of both, honestly. Not always by my choice at first, but I really came to embrace it. And there were so many aspects of it that were just so beautiful in my healing journey. And frankly, even people that I have coached or are in my membership, they can attest to this. They've, again, whether or not by choice, have experienced this aloneness. And in some ways, they have been able to unlock such healing and such clarity in the process. And so I think that's just such an important thing to talk about today. But I want to shed some light on why it's important and not just tell you to go have some alone time and let you loose, right? So before we get into these 7 reasons that I have today, I want to just first address the difference between loneliness and being alone, because there is a difference and there is a distinction that I think is really important to recognize, because this could be an indicator of whether we're just really enjoying and taking advantage of this alone time that we find ourselves in, or if loneliness is creeping in and we might actually need some more help, possibly some professional help. So as far as loneliness goes, if you are feeling a sense of emptiness and disconnection, if you are longing for company, if you are feeling alone despite others being around you, if you're maybe feeling sad or depressed or isolated, and if you feel like this feeling of loneliness is really following you around and consuming you, that is when it might be erring more on the side of loneliness. And that is very, very important to acknowledge and ultimately deal with. The difference between that and this idea of being alone is that being alone, you can still feel connected to others, right? But in this process, there's a listening to your inner voice that's also happening, and you're kind of getting to know yourself again a little bit. And even amongst this alone time, there is a feeling of happiness and stability that we can still feel. Now, I should also interrupt myself by saying happiness is a relative term in grief, okay? We might be feeling very, very sad. We could be feeling very lost and confused and maybe angry over who or what we have lost and what we're going through. That's okay. I mean more here focusing on that stability that I just mentioned. You still feel supported. You still feel like there's maybe a sense of hope out there, or you could believe that eventually, even if you're not right now. And also amongst all of this, lastly, there is just a sense of calm within your own thoughts. You're not necessarily ruminating. You're not feeling overly stuck, and there's just a sense of like inner dialogue. And like I was saying earlier, that introspection that you're tapping into, and you're kind of embracing it and learning about this new side of yourself in the process. Despite how lonely it can be sometimes, there's a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So if you're at all coping with severe feelings of loneliness, anything that I just mentioned sort of in that loneliness category, to the point where it is really affecting your day-to-day life, I implore you to seek help. Please seek professional counseling, therapy, coaching, potentially even through me. I'm here to help you. Please remember that. That is nothing to mess around with. I promise you, there is help, there is support, there are people who can hear you and see you and feel you on what you are going through right now. So I always just want to get that out there. I never want anyone here listening to ever feel like they are just completely alone in all of this, right? So that being said, let's get into some of these reasons that I have today for why alone time can be so critical and important for coping with our grief and for our healing journey. So number one is actually reduced stress. Now, I know this feeling alone can seem stressful, so hang out with me on this one for just a second. Being alone allows us to unwind and decompress from the pressures of everyday life and our grief. It gives us a chance to relax without the demands or distractions of others. And that can sometimes, if people around us are maybe being a little bit unkind, or they are trying to rush us through our grief, or whatever this might look like, that can certainly add some stress and anxiety to our plate, right? So in allowing that alone time to kind of come in and wash over us, and just having that ability to just be, that can really help reduce our stress in a time where we can be very stressed out because grief and loss can be nothing if not stressful, right? Another reason is for increased self-awareness. So this is something I really want to hit home because, at least for me in my own journey, that alone time that I experienced really helped me tap into a level of self-awareness I personally have never experienced before. Spending time alone encourages that self-reflection and that introspection that we really need in our life sometimes. Like I was saying earlier, I was reevaluating a lot of things, where I was living, what person I wanted to date next. And even though I got back together with my now husband, at the time that was not on the table, right? And I really had to think about that for whenever I would be ready. But even friendships, it can help us really reevaluate who has and who is there for us, and who we might need to have another look at as far as how supportive they might be of us or not. Our job, like I said, what we want to be doing with our time, all of the above. And so it really just gives us the opportunity to connect with our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, and that can really lead to greater self-awareness and ultimately personal growth. And honestly, I think this is such a gift. It's such a twisted gift that grief can give us. And it's something that can seep into so many different aspects of our life. And truly, you guys, I have personally experienced this self-awareness, this introspection, all of this, even in the way that I do my job. I think that has come up for me in ways that it hasn't before. It's affected me in the way that I show up for other people. And listen, I'm not perfect, right? None of us are. But it just unlocks this other level of empathy and compassion and awareness that we simply might not have had before. And that's a really, really amazing thing. So another reason that I think this alone time can be so great is it can lead to better decision making. So you might be kind of like, how does that connect? So here's how. When we're alone, we might weigh our options and make decisions without external pressures or biases. That really enables us to make more thoughtful and deliberate choices that better align with our values and our goals. And as far as values and goals and all of that go, as I've been talking about, that can really shift after we go through a loss. And if you're listening to this and that you're not feeling that, or you're not right now, or that hasn't hit for you yet, don't worry about it. Don't rush this process. That might come, that might not. Personally, in my own journey, it certainly did. And people that I have coached, it has. There are people just now in my orbit that are all going through this, where they've been through something big, possibly even devastating, and they are reevaluating everything in their life, their career, like I've been saying, a variety of big and little decisions that might come their way. And now, because of their grief, because of these losses that they have been through, it has really evolved the way that they make decisions and just what kind of life they see themselves leading now, moving forward. So there's also another aspect of this that I want to just mention here. So the thing that I just mentioned about external pressures or biases, grief does nothing if not bring out all of our biases and ways that we feel that people should be handling their grief or their losses or whatever is going on in their life, right? Depending on the way that we were raised, depending on our comfortability with grief and expressing our grief or talking about our grief, the list goes on here. And just a quick little story that I think a lot of you might be able to actually relate to here. It was very shortly after my dad died. And I just want to preface this by saying my family, my friends, they are wonderful, wonderful people. This was more of a reflection on me, and it was just a good learning experience for me. My cousin and one of my best friends were up visiting where I live currently. And it was ultimately to be supportive, but it was also to help me sort of go through things in my now condo where I live, but was my parents' condo once upon a time. And just to help me kind of organize or throw out things that I might not need or want around, or they really just wanted to help me organize. And it got to a point during the day when they were kind of pushing things on me more so than I was ready for. They were like, oh, well, I can throw this out for you, or I can do something with this, or I can arrange for this to be picked up or thrown out, or whatever it was. And I internalized a lot of this, and I was trying to be very patient with how I communicated this to them. But eventually, you guys, it got to a point where I was like, nope, I want to shut this down. I have had enough. I cannot do this right now. I am not emotionally ready. This is way too soon. I just want to go out and enjoy the sunshine in the day. Because again, this was like during the summer when my dad died. And I was like, I actually just want to go outdoors. I don't even want to be here right now. And I kind of had to shut it down. And again, they were coming from such a beautiful place of service and love and care for me. But it really, again, was just such an important lesson in that, whoa, like I think I actually need to do these things by myself without the thoughts or opinions or whatever of other people in my mind. And I realized that it was a very sacred thing that I was in and was about to have to go through long term with this process of navigating life without my parents and going through all of their things. And this sort of brings me to situation number 2 here. going through all of their belongings and making decisions on what to keep versus what not to keep and all of these things. And you guys, I am and was the only child of my parents. So I do not have siblings that can help me with this, nor can they take anything off my plate, or there was no like dividing of the assets. Like it truly all just went to me, which in some ways, I guess one could argue makes things easier. I know that there could be a lot of complexities when multiple siblings are involved, but I will speak just as an only child that also added a lot of pressure on my plate. And so really where I ended up with this was like, I just need to do this at my own pace, on my own time, by myself. And was that hard? Absolutely. There are still things of theirs, plenty of things I have of theirs that I'm either not ready to get rid of or I'm just now getting there. Wherever it is on the spectrum, that is why I just preach so hard, so often that we have to give ourselves grace in our grieving journey. It's too important not to.
Real quick interruption here, and then we'll get back to this episode. If you're someone who is experiencing some form of loss and are trying to navigate the complexities of grief, which you likely are in some capacity if you've stumbled upon this podcast, then this message is for you. If you haven't heard about my Life with Grief membership and community yet, this is truly something you need to check out. This membership is here to guide you into living a deeper, more meaningful, and full life after experiencing loss. Who doesn't want that, right? I created this membership because I know what it's like to navigate and cope with grief on a daily basis, and I know the tools and support it takes to do this effectively. I've done the work myself, and I've coached people just like you to do the same. It comes down to having impactful, effective resources and tools at your disposal, having the right support around you from people who can understand and empathize with your grief, and having encouragement and inspiration around you consistently to not only elicit and spark change, but to keep it and keep the positive momentum going. Enrollment opens once a month for a limited time. Check out the details linked in the description, and I hope to see you in there.
So it's really just such a lesson in being really present with things, with your grief, with whatever situation you're in, but also the physical things around you. I know how difficult physical reminders of our loved ones can be. And whether this is a divorce or the death of a loved one or an ending of a relationship, whatever this looks like. So again, patience, it is key. It is a virtue. There's really something to be said about that. And those are just two quick examples that I had to go through, and I still am going through in my own journey. Another great thing that can be beneficial about alone time is it can actually strengthen our relationships. So I know this seems a bit maybe contradictory, but spending time alone can actually improve our relationships with other people. Why? Because it gives us the opportunity to recharge and take care of our own needs, which can make us more emotionally available and understanding and there for other people, for other friends or family members. And who knows, maybe they will go through something difficult at one point, or maybe you're both kind of struggling with the same loss, but because you are doing such a good job of being there for yourself and giving yourself that alone time and just that decompression that you need, you will then be able to show up for other people even better than you were able to before. And that's an amazing thing. That is a beautiful quality to have. And I'm telling you, not everyone can do that. So it's always a work in progress. I always say, I think it's so important to kind of get a gauge on people's love languages and what they need. And I really hope that that is something that people can have the awareness to do for you. Nothing like a loss to really evoke that in us and really get us thinking like, okay, how do I show up for other people? And this is so individualized too, right? And how some people might show up for us might not resonate because let's say gift giving really isn't our thing. Maybe it's alone time. Maybe it's words of affirmation. So you don't have to be in a relationship to know someone's love language and what is ultimately the most helpful for them. But I certainly think that those of us who have been through loss can appreciate and understand people taking the time to really, acknowledge what we need as an individual to best support us. And as always, that is a two-way street. It always goes both ways. So I think that's just an amazing thing that we can apply to a lot of different aspects of our life, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, what have you. All right, so number 5 on my little list here is it can actually improve your concentration and productivity. So alone time provides a really conducive environment for focus and for concentration. Kind of goes without saying, but without external interruptions, we can better channel our energy into whatever tasks that we have ahead of us, which of course can lead to increased productivity and efficiency, right? Probably goes without saying, if we have the TV on or if we have other people talking in our ear, we're probably not going to get nearly as much done. So here's the thing about alone time though, guys, right? We can listen to music. There might be other things going on around us, but I think really the point here is that when we can allow ourselves just a beautiful opportunity for presence and just being with ourselves, we can really hone in and focus on whatever project we have going on in front of us, whether this is something for work or whether this is like what I was saying earlier about possibly having to go through a loved one's belongings. Or I actually have a family member right now who's dealing with some really unfortunate stuff with probate and a loved one's estate. And that is so difficult. And so I think just having a really nice balance of alone time to process all of that and feel our feels and really give ourselves that time, but also with the right support, that is gold. That is such gold. All right, so to slowly start wrapping this up here, number 6 on my list is enhanced creativity. Solitude can really foster our creativity because it allows our minds to wander a little more freely and to explore new ideas, again, without that external influence. You guys, there are so many incredible creative breakthroughs and innovations that can happen when we really allow ourselves those moments of solitude and reflection. This by far was one of the, I'm going to say like coolest things I actually think that happened to me after my dad died, after both parents were now gone at this point. I started reading again, but I was really intentional with what books I read. I read a little bit of self-help, but I read sort of some autobiographies that also really touched me and really inspired me. I got into writing. I started writing blogs again. I couldn't tell you the last time I had written because nothing had really inspired me more so than the deaths of my parents, to be honest. And for those who don't know, Losses Become Gains, where this podcast originally started, I started that brand, this baby of mine, with a blog. And of course, had my parents not died, I might never have done that. But I allowed myself that alone time to unlock that creative pursuit. And it led to something bigger and more amazing and more healing and cathartic than I could have ever asked for. And I am so grateful for all of this now. I'm not grateful my parents died. Like dang, I would give anything to have them back, of course. But listen, that's not my reality. That is not the reality of so many of you out there. So there does come a point where we have to ask ourselves and we have to say, what can I make out of all of this? It's not necessarily finding a reason for all of it happening and all of these things, but it is truly just the essence of, creating gains from your losses. So what does that look like for you? Is it writing? Is it painting, drawing? Maybe you take up a new hobby. You learn a new language. I mean, the list is endless here. And so I just want to plant the seed just to hopefully inspire you a little bit today, just to allow you and give you permission to think about how this loss not only can affect you, but could potentially unlock something that affects you in a more positive, creative way. And I know that's hard, you guys. And again, depending on where you are in your grief journey right now, just take all this in. You don't have to execute on any of this today. But, I'm an example of that. There are so many incredible griefy accounts that I follow and I'm connected with on Instagram where they've all created something so beautiful out of it. And so there's no rule book here. This can be whatever you want, whatever resonates with you. But I just wanted you to crack that door open a little bit today. All right, last but not least here is alone time can really help improve our mental health and allows us that time that we so desperately need to recharge. Sort of alluded to this earlier. But really, that alone time provides such valuable time and space for us to recharge emotionally and to just replenish our mental resources, which ultimately can reduce the risk of burnout and emotional exhaustion, which is, listen, you guys, that could be a factor in our life regardless of any loss that we might experience. But this is just heightened and becomes such a bigger factor. And really the reason for that is because burnout and all of this can happen much easier and much quicker for those of us who are going through something really devastating. It's very emotionally taxing. We can get very just disheartened and confused, and we're sad. It can affect our immune system. There are so many layers to this. So 2 things I just want to kind of say here on this note, as far as our mental health goes, please, if you do not have this practice already, give yourself just 5 to 10 minutes a day where you really witness your grief each day. So what do I mean by that? It can look really however you want. I love to do this sort of in the morning. If that means you wake up 5 to 10 minutes earlier, give it a shot if you can. But really having a morning routine where something like this is involved, whether it's journaling, whether it's meditation, it's just closing your eyes and being with your breath, whatever this looks like to you, to just sit with it and experience your grief and feel your feels. That is so beautiful and so important because it just allows us that time for it to come in, do what it needs to do. It allows us to just feel it so holistically. And then throughout the day, it really just sets us up for success a little bit more, because this way, when we have a little bit better control over it, we can better manage our emotions and any maybe grief triggers that come up for us, which is very capable of happening. When we can really sit with our grief and feel our feels and allow what needs to come up for us, that can sometimes help mitigate different triggers, and it can kind of just help us manage those emotions when and if they might come out throughout our day, whether that's through breath, whether that's through talking ourselves down a little bit, which honestly, we sometimes have to do. And that is not always comfortable. That can be really hard. We become our own grief coach a little bit in a way here. But allowing ourselves, again, just that 5 to 10 minutes every day to just acknowledge maybe what we're missing about the person that we've lost, or just what emotions are coming up for us that day, whether it's disappointment, it's anger, it's depression, it's sadness, it's loneliness, whatever it is, being able to hold a space for that is such an important and can be a very impactful practice for us. And when you do it just a little bit each day, and also hold a little space for yourself to feel little sparks of joy each and every day, little by little, that can take us so far in our healing journey. So to begin closing out this episode today, 3 big takeaways I hope you can take with you. Number 1, it can be really important to experience this alone time to truly get to know ourselves again, especially a new version of ourselves if a major loss has occurred. And I promise you, yes, this process, it can hurt, it can be long, it can be a confusing road, but the more we open ourselves up to that, I assure you, the more life-changing this process can be for you. Number 2, it can give us an added layer of clarity and peace because it allows us to really hear and comprehend our own thoughts and feelings versus those of other people. And no matter how well-intentioned they are, that can sometimes cloud our judgment and cloud our thought process in a time that can already be very cloudy and very draining. And lastly, number 3, using this opportunity to be present and to see your grief. Touch it, be with it, feel it. Really get your 5 senses going here. This is by far one of the best ways that we can cope and hold space for it all. And ultimately, that means we're better supporting ourselves at the end of the day. And there is nobody that can better support you than you. And ultimately, at the end of the day, this can also help prevent and manage those grief triggers that we spoke about, which I know can be very upsetting. It can be very difficult to navigate. But I assure you, my friend, it is so possible to get this more under control and really navigate this life with grief with a little more ease and a little more grace. So, with that all being said, I really hope you found today's episode helpful. If you did, I would so appreciate you sharing this podcast or this episode with someone who could use it too. I love bringing you as many coping tools as I can, so I hope you enjoyed this today. I hope you got some use out of it. I am sending you so much light and love as always, and I will see you in the next episode.
I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, ways to work with me, to shop my daily journal, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you haven't left a rating or a review, please do so. I would so appreciate it. Or if you feel so inclined to share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.